Hello everyone, welcome to the platform for Inspired Dialogues. My name is Daniel Sumombe and I'll be your host. Today we are honored to have Brother Ansgar Mtitu, a philosopher in making. The brother will be presenting to us a topic having to do with Kantian philosophy in relation to Africa. A lot is going to be discussed here. Then, without wasting time, may I welcome the presenters into the presentation. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance. A topic that I'm about to present, in fact, to introduce just and to allow people to contribute upon, is Kant's conception of enlightenment, a tool to liberate Africans from neocolonialism. I'll introduce by saying, leaders of nationalistic movements in colonial era and the participants of African independence after the Second World War believed that ending colonial rule on the continent would free Africans to pursue a path of development and the use of the natural resources for their own benefit rather than the benefit of their former colonial rulers. However, within few years of independence, a number of African political leaders and intellectuals began to experience and perceive the continuance of external indirect colonial control in economic, cultural, political, and social spheres. This new form of colonial domination is what we term as neocolonialism. And it is this kind of colonialism, according to my presentation, that is more dangerous than the previous one, because it has much to do with mental enslavement than physical. In this sense, in order to achieve freedom, Africans need to decolonize their minds, a task that is not easy, I acknowledge, but possible. From the conviction that this task of decolonizing minds is possible, I came to propose that Immanuel Kant's conception of enlightenment, explained in his essay An Answer to the Question, What is Enlightenment, of 1784, as a tool that can be used as a tool to liberate Africans from neocolonialism. What in fact we mean by saying neocolonialism? Neocolonialism is a continuation of external control of African territories by newer and more subtle method than that which existed in the colonial era. Kwame Nkrumah, who is said to have coined this term, he said that the essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to it is in theory independent and has all outward trapping of international sovereignty, but in reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed by outsiders. Now, what is enlightenment according to Kant? Immanuel Kant in his essay defines enlightenment as a man's release from the self-incurred tutelage or immaturity, in some of the translations minority. And this tutelage or immaturity or minority is the inability to use one's understanding without the guidance of another. Now here we have some questions to ask ourselves. Can we say that in relationship to neocolonialism, Africa is in tutelage or immaturity, as we say? And if yes, what are the possible causes of this tutelage for the Africans? And lastly, how do Africans come out of this tutelage so that they may be liberated from neocolonialism? Concerning the first question, whether Africa is in tutelage or not, we may say yes, because The first thing that neocolonialists did manage is to make Africans dependent on them in all spheres of life: social, economic, cultural, and political. They succeeded by, first of all, brainwashing Africans and make them believe that all good comes from the wise and all evil comes from Africa. This has developed a sense of inferiority among Africans before the superpowers. Now, if you depend on the other in almost all spheres of life, it follows that your mind becomes unable to carry out its functions because you have nowhere to decide. All spheres of your life are controlled by the other. You just wait for the others to think for you, and you just consume what they give you. That's why we may say that Africa is in tutelage or immaturity or minority. For example, in the economy, more than 50% of the budget of the most African countries, including our country, Tanzania, depends on external aids, grants, and loans. And politically, African countries do not actually solve their own internal political problems. They do not solve their own internal political problems. Most of the problems that are facing Africans, especially political problems, are solved by superpowers, as we call them. For example, recently, we had the problem of the conflict that arose between Rwanda and Democratic Republic of Congo. And the East African community tried to solve this problem, but generally failed. But we found these heads of the state being called in Qatar, and things now are at least fine. Also in politics, there have been some cases of which these superpowers established the puppet regimes in Africa. And this is actually one of the methods to try to continue colonize Africa in political sphere. Socially and culturally, we take Western and American ways of life as grounds to judge our civilizations. But we say that, according to Immanuel Kant, enlightenment is man's release from the self-incurred tutelage. But the question is this tutelage incurred in Africa? Immanuel Kant explains that tutelage is self-incurred when its cause is not in lack of understanding, but in lack of resolution and courage to use it without direction from another. I think we can agree that we don't lack understanding as Africans, or we don't lack the ability to think by ourselves, but we have been weak to use it. Now, what are the possible causes for this tutelage according to Immanuel Kant? Immanuel Kant, in fact, mentioned three. He said the first one is laziness, the second one is fear, and the third one are the social and cultural consequences. Probably the question would be, do we fear as Africans to use our thinking or to use our understanding and tackle our own problems? I will say yes, because we have witnessed many leaders who are trying to liberate Africans from neocolonialism are threatened, first of all, by their own people. For example, we have this young man, Ibrahim Traore. He's showing the effects. We don't know the reason behind it or the factors behind it which are pushing him behind, but he's showing the effects. But see, the people are afraid that you will die while we are. So they try actually to make you fear to use this money. And also, we have some kinds of laziness as Africans. I may say yes. Normally, lazy people do find excuses for everything. In Africa today, it's a common tendency that on whatever mistake we perform, we blame colonialism. Even some of the issues which actually we have to take responsibility by ourselves. We say we were colonized. That's why we cannot get away from it. And it's this kind of laziness that has kept us in a comfort zone. No, we cannot think by ourselves. We have just left people, these superpowers, to think for us. So we have also social and cultural constraints. Our society, actually, we may say that a good number of Africans are ignorant about this problem of neocolonialism. So we find that the society you are trying to liberate itself will not support you because itself is in peace to. So the movement actually becomes difficult. So from there, I think we can get other contributors contribute about this.
Well, thank you very much for the provoking introduction. What do you see? Immanuel Kant, in his period, the modern period, late modern period, is coming after a great debate between rationalists and empiricists. And for him, he's trying to reconcile the two, as if he's coming with his own methodology for which he can link the two polarities of extreme rationalism and extreme empiricism. Maybe how do you see that apply to African liberalism? Is Africa to be totally independent, take its own extreme of being pure Africa, kind of trying to be pure Africa, or trying to find the balance between what the domes that have been there, whether the white domes, whether the red domes, or the Indians, or what, so that Africa doesn't have to be pure independent of its own, but maybe kind of find the average point there. Is that the way of liberating Africa, or do you think the one of taking a kind of extreme of being pure independent of its own color and taste and what scent? Do you think it's the way of liberating Africa?
Thank you for the nice contribution, brother. I think being purely independent or extremely independent is an illusion. And it is impossible, for we are not an island as Africans. We live in the world mixed with the different people from different countries. Yeah, what I'm saying is this one: Africa should take the middle position, in fact, the middle position, but this middle position should be Africa. Should be Africa. You know, I can take Brother Kashumba's idea and your idea and form my own idea, as Immanuel Kant did. I took from rationalism and empiricism, but at the end of the day, form this idea, which is of Immanuel Kant himself. This is what I'm saying. That the middle position we are going to take, in fact, it should define us as Africans, as independent Africans. But I'm not saying that we should go to the extreme. Please.
Thank you very much. So we shouldn't take extremes. Perhaps do we know the extreme itself? Do we know what pure Africa is? Maybe let me invite Brother Emmanuel Kashumba to engage. You're welcome.
Thank you, brother, for a thought-provoking presentation. I also kept on thinking about a couple of issues concerning the topic we presented. You know, we're trying to find whether we can use ideas from Kant's Enlightenment to help mitigate the negative effects of neocolonialism. Now, before I point out my comment, or I would say a question that will come later on, I've been thinking about politics for a while now, and I think politics is an area that is super difficult to try to break it and find solutions for the flourishing, let's say, of Tanzania or Africa at large. And the difficulty comes from the multi-layer that politics has, we may propose a solution because of what we believe the case to be. But what we believe the case to be might not actually be the case. So we might be working from an inductive inference, but we're not really tackling the issue. So it's really a struggle that I must admit when it comes to politics. It's an area where I can't really know the essence of something. All I can do is to speculate on and maybe offer a solution to something that I believe deserves a solution. But now going to my comment and question. You are proposing Immanuel Kant's Enlightenment. And in what century was this document written?
This was 18th century.
Possibly. So it's a couple of centuries before now.
Yes.
And I believe Immanuel Kant was responding to the problems of his time. He rose at a particular time where we can say the individual voice was really the topic of the day, writings coming through, volumes of writings coming through, say from him and other philosophers of then, really trying to voice out that an individual has something to say, propagating the agenda that it's time not to primarily depend on tradition, or to primarily depend on an institution's doctrines. Rather, what can an individual contribute to the well-being of the world? So he comes in as a potential, way to go about, But now, this is 21st century, Africa. What is it that made you believe that proposing Kantian enlightenment as a solution now is the best reaction to the problem that Africa has today?
Okay. Thank you, Brother Gashumba, for the nice question. I think the originators of the idea of socialism were in fact Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who lived in 19th century, probably. But they died without witnessing any socialist state. Their idea came to be presented 1 century after by Lenin and Stalin in today's Russia. You see? And so it is very possible to use the old idea, but we try to modify it so that it can fit our context now. Because we have the famous saying, the old is gone. Also, we have the famous saying, the old is gone. So there is a possibility that Immanuel Kant's idea on enlightenment can be used today to enlighten the African and get rid from the problem of neocolonialism. But what we have to do is to make sure that we contextualize the idea of Immanuel Kant and bring it to the reality of Africa today. This is what I thought about.
Yeah, so I posed that question because of this. It is true. It is true that an awakened mind can solve a lot. It is true. An awakened mind can solve a lot. But at the same time, I'm thinking, I once read a book titled The Introduction to African Politics, and in that text, I would say that it excellently pointed out the model of governance that Africa had before colonialism, and some of the modifications that happened due to colonialism. One model that was present before colonialism was what we can call the patrimonial model. Or if now we're speaking of the family context, you would call that the family model, whereby, let's say in a nuclear family, the father is the head of the family, then you have the mother. You can say is a co-head or an assistant, depending on the context of the family. And we have children, But in most cases, in a patriarchal setting, the father is the head, So it's like it's a triangular shaped model or a hierarchy model whereby the father is the head, and whatever happens down there really has to be that which the father says. And we see different forms of this type of family model that is also being demonstrated in the context of the society, whereby possibly you have a chief, and you have a council of elders, and then you drop down to you have the military and the rest members of the state. Now, it's said that could be the authentic political identity of an African political setting, that we abide to such a setting, in that there is a top leader, and then after that there will be secondary leadership, and then the rest will follow. Now, with the coming of colonialism, and later on the introduction of democracy, type of governance, what we call the now African type of leadership model is what is called the neo-patrimonialism, whereby we may say that a particular state is democratically governed. As I said previously, it's very tough. It's very tough to really dig into these issues of politics, because what may be presented on the top layer might not be that which is underneath. So, according to that book, excellently written, it says that what's going on now is what we call neo-patrimonialism, whereby we might be pushed to understand that it's democracy taking place. But what's underneath is really the leadership of a single individual. And beneath that single individual, we have a couple of people present there who are there simply because of a server-client mechanism, whereby they are there to support the leader because of some rewards that these people would have. And why would they receive those rewards? They receive those rewards because of how excellently they try to make sure that the leader remains in power. Now, put that aside, the model, the family model or the patrimonial model of leadership. If I put that aside, I also have the understanding that togetherness is a way of life in Africa. Unity is a way of life. Umoja, the Ubuntu philosophies. Now, in that context, what does this mean? It could mean that standing up tall against the society could be perceived as a negative compared to speaking and behaving and living in a manner that is portrayed to be societally accepted. Now, the Kantian model of thinking proposed in the Enlightenment is that stand up as an individual. Something that Nietzsche would say, something that Kierkegaard would propose, something that Schopenhauer would also propose, etc. Now, in the context of the African setup that views togetherness, societal speaking, societal value as something monumental, how can we now come to link or to propose the Kantian sort of subjectivity, standing up for your own, as a solution, where as a solution in a societal context whereby the direct opposites to that is what is valued? If you get what I'm trying to say, maybe let's put that on the table and see what others would like to say.
Maybe you explain in detail with examples. Maybe now to go direct to the question so that we can keep reflecting on the basic question. How do you reframe that so that we can put the heart now of the question?
We, by the way, even when I say we, or when I make claims, I'm really scared of making claims, you know, because I might fall into generalization. But let me just do that for the sake of posing the question. To a large context, Africa is identified by togetherness. Kantian enlightenment is grounded by the idea that you should stand up as an individual. How can the Kantian philosophy of standing up as an individual become a solution in the context that a society sees togetherness as a value and standing up as an individual as an almost vice?
I think that's very clear. Brother Jackson, yes, please welcome to contribute on the question by Brother Emmanuel Fidelis Kashumba.
Thank you. No. But from the question that Brother Kashumba gave it out, it was in line in such a way that liberation doesn't mean that we look for ourselves, or I look the I in the we. Do we need the we, or do we need the I itself? I remember one article of Father Jasuke, I think he published it 2 months ago. He was just saying that in some context in Africa, that we sometimes can neglect the I in a good philosophy, and sometimes that the I can get the we. In line with different context, I come up with the questions that how do you use Kant enlightenment safely moving from immaturity, enlightenment of Kant in African understanding the concept of Amwai, because for myself I don't think the idea of Kant can be applicable in Africa.
Okay.
In the context African understanding of liberation, it's not based in individual self-understanding. It moves as a group. But we can, the idea of Kantian understanding to make the group understanding of African liberation. We have met, for example, there are some obstacles. One day we still explain something about the use of language, which language to be used, the use of self-appetite for ourselves, like the corruption, presence of untrustful leadership, presence of business ideology, tribalism, many things. To solve these things, we need it. But I can say that to reform African concept of understanding.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Jackson. For himself, he's not on the side of Kant. He stands for Ubuntu, a kind of philosophy that only a kind of liberation philosophy coming from Ubuntu can liberate Africa. Maybe I get him well.
Okay, thank you. No, the contribution is fine. But remember, we are talking of Africa being colonized by the so-called superpowers. Now, what I'm trying to say that still, after enlightenment, the concept can work. We need a so-called independent African way of thinking. This is what I'm probably the independent way of thinking. We as Africans, now we need to think for ourselves to solve our problems without being actually dominated by the others' way of thinking. So it is we Africans who are liberating ourselves among the superpowers. And here, not so we can have the independent communal way of thinking that Africa has to have. But here, we are not advocating the individual thinking, for we know that it is impossible. But let us not deny change. Africa, the communal way of understanding the reality which existed in Africa in the 18th century is not like the communal way of understanding reality in Africa today. Even that communal way of understanding reality which used to identify us is not, I think you can agree with me that it's no longer there. It's no longer there. And if it is there, sometimes we say it is negative. So we want the independent African way of understanding reality.
Okay, thank you, bro. I think we are into the bush of the first problem in philosophy, being the problem of the one and the many. The problem of the one and the many. So you see, we talk as Africa being finding its independence from other non-Africans. But you see, Africa is not one person. Africa is the general entity. You see, so now Africa being a general entity of all those who are Africans. It calls upon this problem of the one and the many, that these many who are Africans are one, so that by their Ubuntu philosophy, that I am because you are, just within themselves, get them united to stand up as themselves, independent of other ideologies from outside, the non-African ideologies. That's the point.
Yes, that's my point.
Thank you very much. I think we have spent some good time already into the presentation. I just would like to thank you everyone for participating in the presentation. Otherwise, I just welcome people like Ashumba, the word, just the word to chew up this point before I welcome the brother for conclusion.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, brother, for the presentation. But it's a presentation that calls for further speculation. Yeah, this is a presentation that invites people to go back to truly understand what is Africa, what is African philosophy, what is African political philosophy. I think sometimes I would say it is best to not even yet give a solution until we have accomplished the task of going back and understanding these things. Next thing I'll propose is this. We speak of neocolonialism. Neo means new, isn't it? And we almost generally tie that type of colonialism with the external, the powers, the superpowers. But I think we're forgetting one venue, and I would call it auto-colonialism. Auto, from the word autos, self-colonialism. That is the hindrance of one's willpower to actually do that which he or she has thought of and really understood. You think about that. And I think that is the ground. Because they should know that we are not thinking. We are thinking. We have clever people in Africa. But I think it's a huge hindrance to us, but not only us, really to any individual out there, is the willpower. A willpower strong enough to break through the threshold of fears, insecurities, a fear of not attaining the basic needs of oneself, and a fear that comes as a result of letting one's emotions conquer one's intellect. Auto-colonialism. Thank you.
Auto-colonialism. Feels new but quite rare. Auto-colonialism. That was the heart of enlightenment. Yourself, from yourself, something. Be free. Be free to think. You as you. It was the idea right there.
There's a small point there to add also. Yeah. When it comes to politics, a few days ago somebody was also ushering me into taking part into some discussion on politics. But I don't know why I always say this. For me, I doubt that beginning from the political domain could solve the individual. I tend to be an advocate of the individual solving the political domain. It's until the individual becomes powerful enough to actually do the good that is understood clearly and distinctly. That is when the political domain would experience a solution.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Quite encouraging. Thank you very much for the wonderful ideas. They all call upon more reflection, but also they are very the ground from where we can start. We don't have no longer a zero ground like some philosophers said from the tabula rasa. No, we already have built something from the discussion. We have known that we've got to reflect ourselves so that we know that it is not a way of solving problem that begins from on air as if we didn't build anything, but from the individual, as proposed by Kashumba, from the individual to the political generalization, general idea. I think that's quite true, and we can see in most parts of Africa. Most political leaders were first of all themselves standing out to say no to this, no to this. Anyway, more reflection can be posed. Now I welcome the presenter just to give a concluding remark as we dive into the conclusions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the contributions that you have made. I would also contribute one thing, saying that even the so-called communal way of understanding reality in Africa was once proposed by an individual. It is an individual with the influence that had proposed to the community, and the community came to agree now, this is our way now. Because I think it is impossible that the community, you wake up in the morning and you have the symbol, idea.
There must be something.
There must be somebody to initiate the idea. So that is very important. So even in this communal way of understanding that Africans have, we have to understand that there is always an individual behind that communal way of understanding the reality. And I think you will agree with me that still enlightenment is very important for Africans today. Enlightenment is very important because the neocolonialism and this we have heard, the auto-colonialism, is a reality that exists. And enlightenment, as I said, is just a tool. It's just a tool to take ourselves away from this danger of neocolonialism and out of neocolonialism.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.